If you ask a theist for evidence of God, do you get it? No, you tend to get arguments. And today we are looking at a new to me argument, the argument from desire. And all you perverts out there thinking we're talking sexual desire, no, it's not that interesting. Not that interesting at all. We're back looking at Peter Kreeft and his argument from desire. And my question for you as we go through it is, what is this desire? What's it for? I've been trying to figure it out, and I've been through this argument a number of times. So let's go. Hi, my name is Scarlett, and I'm an atheist and skeptic. And yeah, like I said, we are back looking at Peter Kreeft and his argument from desire. And yes, I used that effect for the third time when I flashed desire on the screen because it reminds me of pixie dust, and I think that that is what this argument from desire is made of, pixie dust. But I look forward to you telling me what the desire is for. I have the impression it is some slippery concept that can be anything the philosopher wants and not what he doesn't want it to be. As a reminder, Peter Kreeft is a real philosopher. He has taught philosophy. He has a PhD in philosophy. He is the real thing. But I will tell you, this argument made me lose a little respect for him as a philosopher. The last time I looked at him, I appreciated that he saw the flaws in other arguments. But this one, he's all in on this one. I think you'll see what I mean as we get going. So there's the blibbity blab, minimal blibbity blab. Let's get right into this argument and its discussion. Premise 1 states, every natural innate desire in us corresponds to some real object that can satisfy that desire. And we've got a pretty specific thing we're saying here. We're saying that this is every natural innate desire, and that is what corresponds to a real object. And already this is a little slippery to me because who gets to decide what is a natural innate desire? But we'll discuss this a little bit more when we get to the discussion part. Premise 2, that there exists in us a desire which nothing in time, nothing on earth, no creature can satisfy. And I've just got lots of question marks for this. Does there exist this thing? What is it? What is this desire? Need more information. Premise 3, therefore there must exist something more than time, earth, and creatures which can satisfy this desire. And again, I have a bunch of question marks on this one, that it must exist. And again, I'm not even sure what this desire is. We'll come back to this because he's got a lot of discussion. So premise 4, or the conclusion, is this something is what people call God and life with God forever. And I feel like we're in a fantasy land now. Like, why would you label this desire God? I don't know. But I really want us to hold on to these first two premises because most of the discussion is going to revolve around them. That there are natural innate desires that correspond to real objects, and that there is some desire that nothing on earth can satisfy. So the quote-unquote real object must be God. And I especially want to figure out what is this desire that is being talked about in premise 2. All right, let's go on to the discussion. Kreeft writes, the first premise implies a distinction of desires into two kinds, innate and externally conditioned, or natural and artificial. And I would agree, and this is one of the problems I have, is who gets to decide what is in which category. But anyway, let's keep to this discussion for now. We naturally desire things like food, drink, sex, sleep, knowledge, friendship, and beauty. And we naturally shun things like starvation, loneliness, ignorance, and ugliness. I don't want to be all, well, actually, about this part, but most of the things he mentions here are more than just desires. I mean, they are desires too, but they're more than that. Food, drink, sex, sleep are also drives. They're part of our animal nature, so they're not simply desires. We're going to talk about them a little bit more in a minute, but I just want to point out here that this isn't just things that we desire. We would actually perish if we did not have some of these things. But let's move on. We also desire, but not innately or naturally, things like sports cars, political office, flying through the air like Superman, the land of Oz, and a Red Sox World Championship. And these are very, very specific things where the others are categories of things. And I wonder if this is done on purpose or if Kreeft is aware of what he's doing here. Again, we're going to look at these a little bit more, but I wanted to get to the next paragraph of discussion on this before we actually talk about these distinctions between natural and artificial desires. He continues, now there are differences between these two kinds of desires. We do not, for example, for the most part, love the qualifying parts of this, recognize corresponding states of deprivation for the second, the artificial desires, as we do for the first. There is no word like Ozlessness parallel to sleeplessness. Well, there is now, you wrote it, so it's a word. We get to decide what words are. But again, I'm on a tangent. But more importantly, the natural desires come from within, from our nature, while the artificial ones come from without, from society, advertising, or fiction. This second difference is the reason for a third difference. The natural desires are found in all of us, but the artificial ones vary from person to person. All right, so now we have it. Everybody has these natural ones, and they don't vary, but the artificial ones vary. And I want to take a look at the things he specifically mentions. So I'm going to divide this up into things that I think are part of our animal nature that every animal kind of shares, and that starts with food, drink, sex, and sleep. These are things we desire, and then he specifically mentions starvation as a thing that we shun. Now I have to mention, again, except for maybe sleep, these are categories. So while everybody desires food, the specific kind of food that you would desire would be culturally constructed. Like, would you prefer to have macaroni and cheese or a pizza or a big steak or whatever? These are things that are different from person to person. Yeah, everybody needs food or they don't survive. Food, drink, and sleep, unless you have some chemical inducement, sleep might just come upon you. Again, these are more than desires. They're needs and drives. But I do want to point out for sex, that is not something everybody shares. There are, in fact, asexual people. They do not share that. Although the majority of people do, I think it's important to mention that. Already, the fact that there are people that do not have a desire for this kind of disproves this dichotomy. It's not as simple as Kreeft would like to imagine. Moving on to the next things that Kreeft say are innate and natural, there is this desire for knowledge, friendship, and beauty, while we tend to shun loneliness, ignorance, and ugliness. Now, knowledge is obviously beneficial to us and has helped us survive as a species, but again, what knowledge we need at any given period of time is going to vary. And just as an example, like today, computer skills are very useful to most of us, but in the past, they really weren't because there were no computers. And what was more useful to people, migration patterns of animals, or what season is good for planting what fruits or whatever. So this is a general category again, and it's going to be culturally constructed what the filler is of that. And friendship, and we can broaden this out to relationships in general, but we are a social species. We rely on other people, and we get a lot of benefit personally from relationships with other people. And by the way, there's not just loneliness. I mean, he chose that as an opposite, but solitude is something that we might seek out and might be something we desire. So friendship sometimes, solitude and other times. And finally, beauty. Well, we would need to know what beauty actually is to different people. I've met people that seem completely indifferent to the aesthetics of, well, anything. But a lot of times what is beautiful we interpret as something that's beneficial, that brings us benefit. I'm sure there's more discussion we could have on that. But in the interest of time, I'd like to move on to the things that Kreeft has posited as unnatural. So we have sports cars, political office, flying like Superman, the land of Oz, and a Red Sox World Championship. And like I said, these are very specific, and we could have broadened these out into categories that were like food, drink, and so on. So let's look at what categories. So sports cars are actually a desire for material objects, and they might impress other people, and therefore we get status from that, right? So that's the general thing. Political office translates into power. We want control over things, either our lives or other people, or, power. Flying like Superman, I interpret as skills, real or imaginary, and that I think is more general than just flying like Superman. The land of Oz, I interpret as fictional places and stories, and that's more general among humans over time and space. And this Red Sox championship, I interpret as success. Who doesn't want success? Lots of people want success. So that's a desire that I think is more generalized. So in other words, I think that we can find a list of these things that are more general across humanity that we all share, and the filler of them is specific. So just like food, maybe you really crave pasta. That's the thing that you really crave, whereas what I want is a baked potato, just as an example. And for wealth, maybe somebody wants fancy clothes while somebody else wants a sports car. So anyway, these are general categories and there's a filler. And I guess at this point, I'm just wondering if Kreeft knows that these categories that he has created are not as stable as he seems to think they are, that there is definitely something that is natural, innate, and other things that are not. But let's think about the opposite of the unnatural desires. I'm going to go back to my broad list of categories of material objects, power, skills, fictional places/stories, and success, and alter them a little bit. So I'm going to add having material objects or wealth, having power, having skills, fictional places and stories, and having success. And we can indeed find opposites of these: poverty, powerlessness, incompetence or lack of skill, lack of imagination, failure. These are things we talk about. So again, if we go past the things that are very, very specific and look at more general categories, we can find opposites. And just from this discussion of the first premise, looking at this second premise, that there's a desire which nothing can satisfy, how do you know that's God? Because maybe that desire does exist, but you have been conditioned culturally to call that God and life with God forever. It's just a thought I had, but we're not finished with the discussion of the first premise, so let's go look at that. The existence of the artificial desires does not necessarily mean that the desired objects exist. Some do, some don't. Sports cars do, Oz does not. But the existence of natural desires does, in every discoverable case, mean that the objects desired exist. No one has ever found one case of an innate desire for a non-existent object. And I don't know how you decided that, so big question marks there. So I'm kind of concerned about the argument at this point, but we're moving on to discuss the second premise, and this is where we need to pay attention to what is this desire that we're even talking about. All right, Kreeft writes, the second premise requires only honest introspection. If someone denies it and says, I am perfectly happy playing with mud pies, or sports cars, or money, or sex, or power, we can only ask, are you really? Oh my gosh, Kreeft, are you a philosopher or a psychologist? This sort of reminds me of Christians who say to atheists, well, actually you do believe. There's no way you don't believe. You don't know your own mind. So Kreeft, going out there, nuh-uh, no, you can't. All right, so he's denying the fact that people are happy without whatever this desire is that's in the second premise. And by the way, we have changed our terms because in the premise, there's a desire for something that can't be satisfied. And now we're talking about whether or not people are happy. So again, I'm wondering what this desire is. What is it for? And what does happiness have to do with it? And what form of happiness? I'm assuming some deep feeling of happiness, a contentment or satisfaction with life. I'm guessing it's not that brief burst of happiness. But okay, let's keep going. So we can only ask, are you really? But we can only appeal, we cannot compel, and we can refer such a person to the nearly universal testimony of human history and all its great literature. So if a person says they're happy, it's like, no, nuh-uh, but go read some books. All right, let's keep going. Even the atheist Jean-Paul Sartre admitted that there comes a time when one asks, even of Shakespeare, even of Beethoven, is that all there is? Yeah, even the atheist Jean-Paul Sartre is talking about this, y'all, so we should pay attention. By the way, my favorite quote from Jean-Paul Sartre is, L'enfer, c'est les autres. Hell is other people. Certainly, spending any time on social media will let you know that this is true. Now, initially, I wasn't even going to bother with this quote from Sartre because the way I interpret it, it's like, okay, cool, Sartre said a thing. Who cares? How does it support what you're talking about here? But I got really curious about the quote because to me, it doesn't sound like Sartre. I was wondering, how did he use the quote? Was it a part of a novel he wrote? What is it even about? Some of you may know that I studied 20th century French literature, and I focused a lot on Simone de Beauvoir, who was Sartre's partner in crime and partner in other things for much of his life, and was a focus of my dissertation when I got my PhD. And I also read a lot of Sartre at the time because I was thinking about comparing the two. Anyway, long story short, I just wanted to know what the heck is this quote about. So I popped over to the Googletron, and the very first hit I got was from the Ask Philosophy subreddit, where somebody is actually looking for this very same quote that I was looking for. The answer comes from Reinschlau. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Anyway, who writes, I take it you are reading a book called Handbook of Christian Apologetics by Peter Kreeft, since he is the only one who attributes that line to Sartre, which is really strange because he quoted this exact same line in his earlier book called Heaven, the Heart's Deepest Longing, but attributes it to Aldous Huxley. But he gives a footnote saying it is quoted from Houston Smith's The Religions of Man. But Smith does not give a citation. So we've got like a quote mystery going on here, and I love it. And I love that this was my first hit, sent me over to Reddit. Reinschlau continues, the closest thing to this I can find in Huxley is a passage from one of his books called Antic Hay. And then there's a quote. It's not exact, but a good chance that this is the source. I did follow all of Reinschlau's links, and especially this one to Houston Smith's The Religions of Man, and there you go. This quote is attributed to Aldous Huxley without attribution. And just to let you know, on that Google search, there weren't that many pages of results. The top hit was this Reddit post. There were these pages by Peter Kreeft, and then a bunch of apologetics that linked back to Kreeft. By the way, back to that Reddit post, it is also linked to text detectives. I think that's really awesome. So here's the thing, people. Always research your quotes. If you see a quote in something, go back to the source. See if the person actually said it and in what context. It's really, really important. While I was researching this quote, I looked at a lot of things that Sartre actually said. I never found anything like this quote at all. Nothing. Which I don't find very surprising because Sartre was the philosopher of facing the nothingness of your life and creating something anyway, that your life is the project you create out of it. I'm really not expressing existentialism very well, but anyway, it just is a weird quote to attribute to Sartre. But I did find this quote, and I was able to check that he actually said this. It was actually in the New York Times as well as Le Monde. I couldn't get to the Le Monde because it's behind a paywall, but it was in the New York Times, and so yes, Sartre definitely said this. It is a lot easier for a philosopher to explain a new concept to another philosopher than to a child. Why? Because the child asks real questions. Sick burn, Jean-Paul. That's all I'm saying. So back to our discussion. Even the atheist Jean-Paul Sartre admitted, there comes a time when one asks, even of Shakespeare, even of Beethoven, is that all there is? And did he say this? I don't think so. There is no evidence that he said it. And so I find this a little problematic on the part of our Peter Kreeft philosopher extraordinaire that he didn't track down this quote. I guess he was just relying on that Houston guy. But Houston attributed it to Aldous Huxley, who apparently didn't say that thing either. So, oops, I guess. So what is the point of this quote? And I would go back to the line before it where he says, we can only appeal, we cannot compel. We can refer such a person to the nearly universal testimony of human history in all its great literature. So we quote one person, who apparently didn't even say the thing that he is said to have said, that this is a made-up quote, who knows why or where it came from. But I guess if even the atheists, who are also existentialists, say this kind of thing and express this kind of desire, you don't need a lot of quotes, right? But going back to that premise of this desire that nothing can satisfy, I'm not even sure that this quote demonstrates that at all. I'm not even quite sure what that quote was about. So overall, not great. I still don't know what this desire is, and we're getting ready to discuss the conclusion. All right, so let's read that. The conclusion of the argument is not that everything the Bible tells us about God and life with God is really so. Oh, do tell. Yeah, that's true. I agree. Let's go on. What it proves is an unknown X, but an unknown whose direction, so to speak, is known. This X is more beauty, more desirability, more awesomeness, more joy. I don't even know what to make of some of this. This X is to great beauty as, for example, great beauty is to small beauty or to a mixture of beauty and ugliness, and the same is true of other perfections. I don't even know what this is. I'm not sure I understand this paragraph, but maybe the next one will elucidate. But the more is infinitely more, for we are not satisfied with the finite and partial. Thus the analogy, X is to great beauty as great beauty is to small beauty, is not proportionate. 20 is to 10 as 10 is to 5, but infinite is not to 20 as 20 is to 10. The argument points down an infinite corridor in a definite direction. Its conclusion is not God as already conceived or defined, but a moving and mysterious X which pulls us to itself and pulls all our images and concepts out of themselves. No idea what any of this means. Just like question marks all over the place. Let's keep going and see if it becomes clear. In other words, the only concept of God in this argument is the concept of that which transcends concepts, something no eye has seen, nor ear heard, nor the human heart conceived. In other words, this is the real God. And I guess forgetting that the Bible God walked on the earth in the Old Testament, talked with people, all that kind of stuff. And also that other religions exist that have different conceptions of God. But I guess that's what we're talking about. The direction is toward that, towards this concept of God. Let's keep going. C.S. Lewis. Yeah, we have to bring C.S. Lewis into this. Okay, C.S. Lewis, who uses this argument in a number of places, summarizes it succinctly. Creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for these desires exists. A baby feels hunger. Well, there is such a thing as food. A dolphin wants to swim. Well, there is such a thing as water. Men feel sexual desire. Well, there is such a thing as sex. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. Oh, and look, here's an actual citation that can tell us where we can find this quote. And I did look this up, and this is an actual existing quote. And hey, Peter Kreeft, nice to know that you can make citations. But anyway, I have no idea what C.S. Lewis is talking about with this. A desire which no experience in the world can satisfy. The most probable explanation is you were made for another world. The first thing that comes to mind is narcissism. You're just so awesome and you were made for another world, baby. I actually don't want to talk too much more about C.S. Lewis in that quote because it's not important. It's like C.S. Lewis said a thing and it's like, so what? And you haven't demonstrated anything with that. How do we know that that desire is not one of these artificial desires? I mean, you're talking very generally, and basically I know you want it to be true. So let's move on to the questions that Peter Kreeft considers. Question 1. How do you know the major premise that every natural desire has a real object is universally true, without first knowing that this natural desire also has a real object? But that is the conclusion. Thus you beg the question. You must know the conclusion to be true before you can know the major premise. And I think the way I interpret this, and all of these arguments, frankly, is we want to demonstrate a God, and so we work backwards and see what premises we can build to make that happen. But I don't know. Let's go on and see the discussion. Reply. This is really not an objection to the argument from desire only, but to every deductive argument whatsoever, every syllogism. It is the old saw of John Stuart Mill and the nominalist against the syllogism. It presupposes empiricism, that is, that the only way we can ever know anything is by sensing individual things and then generalizing by induction. It excludes deduction because it excludes the knowledge of any universal truths, like our major premise. For nominalists do not believe in the existence of any universals, except one, that all universals are only names. I'm not going to say a whole lot about this paragraph because I am not an expert on nominalists and I don't know anything about John Stuart Mill. And I do think we can learn things through both deduction and induction. But I find a lot of syllogisms to be, well, frankly, silly. And they seem to be working backwards. They want to prove something, so they set up a quote-unquote proof to prove that thing. And I also find the way they use words sometimes to be slippery. But let's go on to the next paragraph of discussion. This is very easy to refute. We can and do come to a knowledge of universal truths, like all humans are mortal, not by sense experience alone, for we can never sense all humans, but through abstracting the common, universal essence or nature of humanity from the few specimens we do experience by our senses. We know that all humans are mortal because humanity as such involves mortality. It is the nature of a human body to be mortal. Mortality follows necessarily from its having an animal body. We can understand that. We have the power of understanding or intellectual intuition or insight. in addition to the mental powers of sensation and calculation, which are the only two the nominalist and empiricist give us. We share sensation with animals and calculation with computers. Where is the distinctly human way of knowing for the empiricist and the nominalist? Again, I don't know a lot about nominalism, so I really can't address much of these points. The specific example he gives of all humans are mortal, well, yeah, because we know how bodies work. So even though we haven't experienced all bodies, we can know that this is a part of what it means to have a body. I also wonder about this last sentence, we share sensation with animals and calculation with computers. Animals can also calculate in their own way. There's like a continuum of ways that we can calculate. And computers calculate because we made them that way. So this particular sentence, I'm really not sure what it's doing here. But the fact that he's asking about a distinctly human way of doing something makes me wonder if that's not the whole point of just appealing to us as humans. I don't know, maybe other people have something to say about these particular discussions. You can put it in the comments below. Let me know what you think of them. Look forward to reading that. Kreeft goes on. When there is no real connection between the nature of a proposition's subject and the nature of the predicate, the only way we can know the truth of that proposition is by sense experience and induction. For instance, we can know that all the books on this shelf are read only by looking at each one and counting them. But when there is a real connection between the nature of the subject and the nature of the predicate, we can know the truth of that preposition by understanding an insight. For instance, whatever has color must have size, or a perfect being would not be ignorant. I'm fine with everything he has to say here. I don't have a problem with this particular paragraph, but I do wonder, again, in the case of our looking for a desire that nothing can satisfy, like what we're even talking about. But we're getting ready to get to that discussion. Question 2. Suppose I simply deny the minor premise and say that I just don't observe any hidden desire for God, or infinite joy, or some mysterious X that is more than Earth can offer. And frankly, I would add, what if I don't even understand what you're talking about? But that's just me. Let's see how Kreeft answers. Reply. This denial may take two forms. First, one may say, although I am not perfectly happy now, I believe I would be if only I had $10 million, a Learjet, and a new mistress every day. Way to assume the gender leanings of the person you're talking to. Anyway, the reply to this is, of course, try it. You won't like it. It's been tried and is never satisfied. In fact, billions of people have performed and are even now performing trillions of such experiments, desperately seeking the ever-elusive satisfaction they crave. For even if they won the whole world, it would not be enough to fill one human heart. And again, I've got like lots of question marks about this. Like, what is this desire we're talking about? So it kind of sounds like we need this satisfaction to be permanent in addition to whatever this mysterious X is that I'm still uncertain of what it is. Like, I still don't know what that is. So it's kind of like Kreeft just going, nuh-uh. Kreeft goes on, yet they keep trying, believing that, if only, next time, this is the stupidest gamble in the world, for it is the only one that consistently has never paid off. It is like the game of predicting the end of the world. Every batter who has ever approached that plate has struck out. There is hardly reason to hope the present ones will fare any better. After trillions of failures and a 100% failure rate, this is one experiment no one should keep trying. Now, again, I still don't know if this mysterious X is a real desire, what the desire is for, what he's talking about. But I see that there are two things going on. The original premise seemed to posit a desire that nothing can satisfy, like a single desire for something, this mysterious X. But now we seem to be saying that some desires satisfy us for a short time, but fail to do so over time. So it seems like we've shifted what we're talking about, because maybe I'm happy today with this little bit of stuff that's, just worldly stuff, but maybe I'll need something different tomorrow, and that other thing will make me happy too. But apparently that's not good enough. So it can't just be this desire for something that nothing can satisfy. It has to be a desire that is permanent as well. I guess? Let's keep going. A second form of denial of our premise is, I am perfectly happy now. This, we suggest, verges on idiocy, or worse, dishonesty. It requires something more like exorcism than refutation. Nuh-uh, I guess. There's just no way you know yourself. You just have no clue, like me, grand philosopher, knows you. But let's keep going. This is Meursault in Camus' The Stranger, and I'm like, what? I don't know what Meursault has to do with this desire for the mysterious X and people being happy right now. So for those of you who haven't read The Stranger since like high school or whatever, Meursault is the main character of Albert Camus' The Stranger. He is detached from his emotions and detached from people in his society. His mother dies and he doesn't feel anything. He kills an Arab on the beach and, he's condemned to death, and he gets to a place where he's okay with that. And, there's a critique of the society of the time and all kinds of stuff. So I don't know what Meursault has to do with that. And you're welcome for the SparkNotes version of The Stranger. It's not a good one, but anyway, I still don't know what it has to do with this particular point. By the way, on the topic of The Stranger, I recommend the Meursault investigation by a writer named Kamel Daoud, who's Algerian, who wanted to show the colonialist attitudes of The Stranger and give names to all the people that are nameless in The Stranger. So, recommend. It's really good. Back to our discussion with Kreeft. This is subhuman. Vegetation, pop psychology, even the hedonist utilitarian John Stuart Mill, one of the shallowest though cleverest minds in the history of philosophy, said that it is better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. And I don't know why we have to attribute these adjectives, shallow but clever kind of thing. I have to say, I don't know much about John Stuart Mill, so I cannot comment on his philosophy, but I did check on this quote, and he did say it. Some of you might have already known it. For me, this quote shows the elitism and class bias of people like Mill and Kreeft and other philosophers. Basically, what Mill is saying is that it is better to be unhappy as a philosopher, aspiring to this higher thing that he thinks is good, that's the higher good, than to be somebody that's happy with things that he considers to be baser, like, eating and sex and things of that nature. And it's who are you to get to decide that? Who are you to get to decide what makes people happy? Shouldn't they get to decide for themselves what makes them happy? And if they don't have this desire for this mysterious X that I still don't understand, it seems like that's fine, but you don't get to determine what makes people happy. Now, I have to say that I've spent my whole life in the humanities, and so I do agree that thinking these deep thoughts and examining thoughts gives me great pleasure, and I enjoy it a lot. But I recognize that a lot of people out there don't care about the things that I care about. They're very, very different from me. And who am I to judge that they have a worse life than I do if they're not aspiring to these higher goods? But the inclusion of this particular quote is, to get the win, right? Cherry pick those quotes by other philosophers that not only make you seem smart, but also support your point, and don't look at ones that don't. Frankly, I think that Kreeft only put that reference to Camus' The Stranger as a way to say, look at me, I can quote other philosophers. I don't know why he feels the need to do it, but since he brought up Camus, I would like to talk about a different idea that Camus had that I actually think is much better than The Stranger. I enjoyed The Stranger, it's a cool story and everything, but this, I think, is better philosophically. Camus wrote, "The gods had condemned Sisyphus to ceaselessly rolling a rock to the top of a mountain, whence the stone would fall back of its own weight. They had thought, with some reason, that there is no more dreadful punishment than futile and hopeless labor." And of course, we're all familiar with this Sisyphus story, that he is condemned to roll this rock as a punishment. But Camus goes on, "I leave Sisyphus at the foot of the mountain. One always finds one's burden again. But Sisyphus teaches the higher fidelity that negates the gods and raises rocks. He, too, concludes that all is well. This universe, henceforth, without a master, seems to him neither sterile nor futile. Each atom of that stone, each mineral flake of that night-filled mountain, in itself forms a world. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy." So there's a lesson that's sort of the opposite of what Kreeft is talking about. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Sisyphus and the stone is us. It's the human condition. But can we find happiness in doing something that seems to serve no purpose? I'm still not sure what happiness has to do with this unknown desire. But since Kreeft is talking about happiness, we can find all kinds of quotes that take on different aspects of happiness. And so, imagine Sisyphus happy. Let's go on to the final question. Question 3. This argument is just another version of Anselm's ontological argument, which is invalid. You argue to an objective God from a mere subjective idea or desire in you. And I do think that this is an interesting point to raise because I feel like that desire, this unknown desire, is kind of like that perfect being. Does it actually exist, or is this something that you just think exists? Or dare I say you've been conditioned by society to think exists? Things I wonder about. Anyway, Kreeft answers, "No, we do not argue from the idea alone, as Anselm does. Rather, our argument first derives a major premise from the real world of nature, that nature makes no desire in vain. Then it discovers something real in human nature, namely human desire for something more than nature, which nature cannot explain, because nature cannot satisfy it." And I don't know what to make of this, really. I mean, in his discussion, Kreeft does point out that there are artificial desires, and so how did you determine that this desire is natural in your dichotomy, and it's not artificial, planted by society? That would be a question I would like to see you answer. But anyway, he goes on, "Thus the argument is based on observed facts in nature, both outer and inner. It has data." And you probably won't be surprised to know that no data is on this page at all, and it doesn't point us into another direction where we could see such data. So once again, I don't know what this desire is. Like, I do not have a good enough grasp of what the desire is that he's even talking about. And from his discussion, I go back to what I think of as a slippage, that there is a desire that nothing can satisfy. And that some desires do satisfy us for a short time, but fail to do so over time. So I don't know about this first one. I don't know what this desire is that nothing can satisfy. I still haven't got a good grasp of what it is. But on this second side, desires satisfy us for a while, but fail to do so over time. Well, we're always changing. Life is always moving forward. There are new circumstances. We are not the same person in one period of our life than another period of our life. And so in addition to there being some desire, what I have the impression of is whatever it is has to satisfy us on a permanent basis. This appears to me to be a kind of moving the goalposts. Like, we posit a desire, but now the desire has to be permanent. And of course, Kreeft does recognize that things change. I mean, it's human to change. I mean, write a syllogism about that. But also he has lots of arguments from change. The fact that things change is also a sign of God. Just look at the beginning of the argument from change, which is the first argument on his page. So I guess the fact that things change, proof of God. The fact that we don't want things to change, also proof of God. Now, we're only here to talk about the argument from desire, so we're not going to discuss the argument from change today. We got enough on our plate. Needless to say, I find this whole language about things bringing themselves into being to be a little ridiculous and not understanding how change comes to be. But if we're talking about the fact that our desires do not stay the same, I think it is useful to talk about the hedonic treadmill, if anybody has ever heard of this concept. And yeah, it's not that kind of treadmill. But let's look from the wiki page. The hedonic treadmill, also known as hedonic adaptation, is the observed tendency of humans to quickly return to a relatively stable level of happiness or sadness despite major positive or negative events or life changes. According to this theory, as a person makes more money, expectations and desires rise in tandem, which results in no permanent gain in happiness. Philip Brickman and Donald T. Campbell coined the term in their essay Hedonic Relativism and Planning the Good Society. The hedonic treadmill viewpoint suggests that wealth does not increase the level of happiness. So the point is, from a psychological point of view, if you get something you want and it improves your life, you're going to return to some kind of baseline. It's not going to keep those levels of happiness the same. And by the way, this happens in negative circumstances too. So people who are in a war zone or who are undergoing really bad circumstances, they don't stay down in the dumps and low. They return back to this baseline. They get used to the bad circumstances. And I think we can all see from an evolutionary standpoint how this benefits us. In the good circumstances, we don't think we have enough. We're going to keep looking for other things. And in the bad circumstances, it keeps us going. It keeps us wanting to survive. The wiki goes on to say, hedonic adaptation can occur in a variety of ways. Generally, the process involves cognitive changes such as shifting values, goals, attention, and interpretation of a situation. Further, neurochemical processes desensitize overstimulated hedonic pathways in the brain, which possibly prevents persistently high levels of intense positive or negative feelings. The process of adaptation can also occur through the tendency of humans to construct elaborate rationales for considering themselves deprived through a process social theorist Greg Easterbrook calls abundance denial. So the hedonic treadmill explains why when you get what you want or you get all of these things that you think are going to make your life better, you don't stay in that state forever. It also, again, explains why if you're in negative circumstances, you can adjust and think that things are okay. So returning to this argument from desire, it just doesn't convince me. I still don't understand what this point number 2, desire, which nothing in time, nothing on earth, or no creature can satisfy. I don't know what it is. But here's Scarlett's demonstration. Point 1, humans have desires, some needs-based, some culturally constructed, some induced by society. 2, because things are always changing, our desires may be fulfilled for a time, but not for our whole lives. 3, humans may want a life after death or the existence of a deity, but desire doesn't mean they do exist. Conclusion, how does any of this get us to God? And fuck syllogisms, I guess, because this wasn't a syllogism. It wasn't proof of anything. It was me asking questions and stating what I think is true. Yeah, I'm really not big on syllogisms. I'm no good at making them. I'm not really convinced by a lot of syllogisms. And somebody explained the usefulness of them. I mean, I remember learning them, and I do understand they can help you think logically, but I just see them used in such piss-poor ways. As I was looking at stuff to make this video, I was reminded of a quote from Milan Kundera from his novel, The Incredible Lightness of Being. And it reads, "Human time does not turn in a circle. It runs in a straight line. That is why man cannot be happy. Happiness is the longing for repetition." And all I can think of is, Kundera must not have dealt with a lot of apologists. So that's what I have for you this week. What did you think of Peter Kreeft's argument from desire? Please put it in the comments below. Explain to me what I missed or what I haven't understood, or maybe I'm just being totally dense about. I would really love to know. And while you're down there, you know the drill. Like, subscribe, all the YouTube stuffing. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Algoritmo and his consort Algoritmo will bless you with all kinds of recommendations, good, bad, and ugly. It's YouTube, people. It's the way it goes. And if you like what I do, you can buy me a coffee. Here is a QR code with my sweet, sweet kitties who thank you for buying them kibble. They don't think you're buying me a coffee or anything. They think it's all for them. And I will see you in the new year for something different. I don't know what. Maybe I'll go back to some videos for a while. Maybe I'll do another Peter Kreeft. Not quite sure, but you know it's going to be stupid. Bye for now and stay safe out there.